We've just had a law change in the UK, actually, where now you're allowed to know as the victim, which is unbelievable. This wasn't a thing, actually, but you're allowed to know who your stalker is.
I want to talk to you about Sharon Osbourne and Ozzy Osbourne. In reality, their relationship was full on. I think in 1989, Ozzy Osbourne basically was arrested for attempted murder. In your opinion, why do you think people stay in an abusive relationship like that, and why people tend to stay in these long-term abusive relationships?
Usually why victims stay in that relationship is fear, and wanting the relationship to go back to the way it was in the beginning, because it wouldn't have always been like that. That abuse hasn't started day one. It does take some time for the mask to slip and for it to unravel. At that point, then the victim's then very much ingrained into the relationship. And I would say more so if you've had children as well. So, there's possibly why women would stay if they've had children is for the sake of the children. We hear that saying. Quite often you will hear horrific stories where the perpetrator of domestic abuse will end up with custody of the children because the victim, which is more often than not the mother, looks as if they can't handle their situation. But actually it's because they're a victim of violence. If you remove the perpetrator out of the situation, then they would be a great parent, but they're judging their parenting skills while they're being abused by the perpetrator and then switching custody from the victim to the perpetrator.
If the child lives in a house where there is domestic abuse, is that child already automatically seen as someone who's in danger?
Well, they're not automatically seen as in danger, but under the new domestic abuse bill, they are classed as a victim. So I think it's a difficult one. It's like, again, it's down to police response and their opinions and biases.
There is this term which you read about when you read about domestic abuse and this kind of relationships, which is called trauma bond. Have you heard of that? Is this like a real thing? Have you come across anyone who's been talking about it?
I mean, I've heard the term. It's really difficult to say because every situation is extremely different. But, you've heard of things like Stockholm syndrome and things like that. But I just don't think that they're a thing. There's professionals that have said, look, that doesn't even exist. No one chooses to be a victim. So I don't think it's a trauma bond. It's more like a fear and a grooming. Just labelling something a trauma bond, then professionals like to just hop onto things like that and then, oh, well, you must be trauma bonded. That then might not be helpful in somebody's situation where, for example, a social worker is saying that the child needs to be removed from the parent. Well, they're trauma bonded. I don't like labels like that.
All right, let's talk about Conor McGregor, because he's the MMA star. He recently lost a case. There was a rape and assault case. So she won the case against him. McGregor still continues his career. He's been recently in America where he's been called a pride of Ireland. I want to ask you, do you think that it's still somehow socially okay for men, especially in certain careers, like sport, MMA fighting? It's all kind of like a bit of a toxic masculinity.
No, it's definitely excused in sports, isn't it? You see it all the time. And like the shocking thing is with the Conor McGregor thing, it's like his original persona was, rags to riches, young lad from Ireland that's made it good. And he even come across as a family man. And I think I even posted something like years ago saying like relationship goals, and he's there in the octagon with his partner who he's still with. All of this has come out about Conor McGregor, but actually it's not just that one case. Other stories have come out since that he's done this time and time again. Shocking, absolutely shocking. But yeah, of course, in a male environment, it is still very much like accepted, I expect.
This conversation about women somehow provoking men or being manipulative, therefore asking in a way for that behavior. Why do people do this victim blaming? Where is this coming from?
It's misogyny. It's bias. It's very easy to just say, oh, gold digger. But what are these women getting from stepping forward in the public eye? They're not getting anything. They're getting more abuse, if anything. We talked about Conor McGregor. She's probably had more abuse now than ever before, that she wasn't in the public eye. So, and then people saying that she's a gold digger. No, women come forward and victims come forward. It's validation and it's justice. Why should we not come forward? You know, again, silence is a perpetrator's first weapon of choice. To shame the victim, it's very convenient to shame victims and make them feel like they're somehow at fault. And that's how grooming works and abuse works. It's like they try and put the shame on the victim. And that's one thing I always said is like, I literally hold no shame. I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't ask for any of this. I didn't ask to be a victim. And the recent case with that poor lady, Giselle, just unbelievable. The bravery of her to come forward and speak out the way that she has.
I think one of the fascinating things in that case was that the men were trying to say that they thought that she agreed to all of that.
Wow. I mean, but then on the flip side, you've got the recent Bonnie Blue, where she slept with so many men in a day. And I just think, what is it with these men that they would queue up 1,000 of them? I just don't get it. What is their thought process? Oh, honestly, are they really that desperate? Yeah. Wow.
I want to talk about stalking. So I basically, when I started Googling stalking and celebrities, it's actually shocking. But I feel like now it's so much changed and it's become something that anyone can suffer from. Do you think if the spread in stalking was somehow connected to social media, how kind of it's everywhere now?
I mean, I think stalking's always been there. We talk more about celebrity stalking than we do stalking that happens to everyday people. Social media would definitely be playing a part in that because it makes it easier for the stalker to stalk. It's down to the big tech companies to do something about it, and unless they're on board, it's very difficult for laws to control that, if you like, because the jurisdiction of the internet isn't just the UK, you know, it's everywhere. So trying to manage that, it is a problem. And I do sit on a board that's a justice supervisory board with Tech UK, who's like the kind of regulatory media outlet for tech. And I sit on that board and we talk about how do we tackle these things? And that is a problem, you know. Internet and social media is a huge problem for police because how do they manage that? I mean, now you've got a thing called deep fakes. Your face can be superimposed on all sorts of things. I mean, it's just shocking. But, you know, there was even like something I read around the metaverse, and like there was the first conviction of something happening in the metaverse where a woman was sexually assaulted in this kind of like virtual world, which I don't doubt that we're going to get to a position where that's like traumatic, but I kind of feel like let's deal with what's happening in the real world. It's definitely a problem. I don't know how we tackle it unless we've got the tech companies on board. And some of the tech company leaders, they prefer freedom of speech more than anything else. And I think that's a problem.
In terms of the different types of stalking, can you kind of walk us through that?
There's different types of stalkers. So you've got stranger stalking. And we've just had a law change in the UK, actually, where now you're allowed to know as the victim, which is unbelievable. This wasn't a thing, actually. But you're allowed to know who your stalker is. But you've got stranger stalking. You've got fixation from an ex-partner. I think if it's a stranger stalking you, when you're reporting to the police, it's very obvious to them that you don't want that attention because you can be like, well, I don't know this person. That's where there's the kind of blurred lines, if you like, in terms of when it comes to domestic abuse. You know, stalking's a form of domestic abuse. If you've ended a relationship, it then becomes stalking if they're still continuing that harassment, that contact. And then when you're reporting it to the police, that's where it kind of gets minimised because it's as if you've been in a relationship with that person, so somehow that stalking behaviour is then, you know, excused, if you like, because of the relationship.
You've mentioned the change to the stalking law. Was there any other things, any other kind of changes you've managed to push through? Was there any other changes that happened recently?
So, probably about 8-9 years ago now, we changed the stalking laws from 5 years to 10 years. So I worked with another stalking victim who, she was a GP, and she actually had one of her patients who stalked her over a period of 7 years, completely changed her life. I mean, she ended up leaving the UK to get away from him because he came out of prison or was coming out of prison, and so she left the UK. in her case, the judge did say in his summing up, I can only give him a maximum of 5 years. And he said, you know, it would be a good idea for you to go to your MP. And that was one of the campaigns that we picked up at Paladin, the National Stalking Advocacy Service, where we looked to extend those to 10 years, which we did.
Do you remember Tina Turner?
Yes.
Her case, I think, was quite interesting because obviously she had a career with her partner, Ike Turner, and he was extremely abusive to her.
It was awful.
He was awful, yeah. And they've split up, and she basically had to, that's when she built her solo career. She had to spend quite a lot of money first paying off debts, which they've accumulated together, and because of the cancellations of their concerts and everything. And that made me think about the financial dependency on the stalker. Do you come across that a lot? Is there any advice you can give to someone? Because I can imagine that could be a breaking point where we'll be like, I literally can't leave because how am I going to feed my kids?
And, you know, finances are used in that way. I mean, Jason Smith, that was one of the things that he used in order to stop me doing certain things. He would borrow large amounts of money off me. And that meant that I would constantly be asking him for this money back. Well, I need my money back. It's a form of control. Laws in this country make it extremely hard, particularly for the most vulnerable in terms of financial, because they brought in a thing with the universal credit where you can only have one person in a household that claims a universal credit. So if you've got a male and a female and they're in a relationship and the guy's the abuser and then he decides that he's going to claim the universal credit, you know, who's then suffering from that? It's the woman. And often that can be used in family court situation where they're constantly putting you through litigation where you're having to find the money to fight through the courts for your children.